So good morning and welcome to today's webcast on SharePoint as an electronic document and records management system. My name is Sanjay Vada and I've been at Visual as part of the commercial sales team for almost 4 years now. Mike, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and then we'll move into the next part of the presentation.
Okay, thanks Sanjay. So my name's Mike Owen. I'm the business productivity lead here at Visual. I've worked with SharePoint for many years, since the dark ages of 2001. So I've seen the EDRMS functionality evolve quite considerably over time. Okay.
Thanks,
just
Mike.
a few notes on guidance. Sorry, Sanj?
So do you want me to cover the guidance off?
Go on then.
Great. So just a bit of guidance, as Mike said. So before we start, there's some features of the webcast that we'd like to share with you just to ensure you get the most out of the session today. So we'd like to keep it interactive as we go, and we'd encourage you to ask questions throughout the webcast using the instant message facility in the Skype window just on the left. We'll aim to answer as many of your questions as possible during the webcast, but if need be, we can follow up with you thereafter on email, or you can schedule a call with your account manager. We'll also be having a dedicated Q&A session towards the end of the webcast. For those of you that are dialing in, please can you ensure that you're on mute to eliminate any background noise, and also in addition we'll be recording today's session and we'll make that available all to you as a link after the meeting. So who are Visual? So Visual are a pure play Microsoft Gold partner, and that makes us unique in the Microsoft partner community. You know, we only provide consulting and managed services on the Microsoft technologies. So this focus enables us to ensure that we work really closely with our customers to maximize their investments in their licensing. We're a tier 1 Microsoft platform partner, and we cover all workloads, with currently the only exceptions being Dynamics Navision, AX, and Great Plains. We're also a Microsoft Smart Teaming partner, and in the last year we've delivered in excess of £1 million worth of consulting services on behalf of Microsoft. We're also immensely proud to have received the UK Country Partner of the Year 2015 award, which demonstrates the depth and breadth of our capabilities, and that Microsoft view us as a trusted partner that delivers customer success. So how is our business structured? As you can see, it's broken down into 3 distinct divisions. Our business group houses our engagement managers and architects, and this team, by understanding your business drivers and objectives, can help deliver transformational change at scale using Microsoft technologies. I'll make no bones about it. First and foremost, Visual is a technology consulting powerhouse. We don't employ any pre-salers, any generalists, and any consultant that you speak to will be an expert in their field. This group is split into 5 technology practices. Firstly, we've got Cloud Infrastructure, which delivers solutions based on System Center Suite, Windows Server, Hyper-V, Direct Access, Microsoft Identity Manager, and Azure. The UCN messaging team work with Skype, Exchange, and 365. Business Productivity, where Mike sits, is all around SharePoint. We have a dedicated CRM practice. Last but not least, we've got an application development team. This team have created a suite of applications that we call Minerva, which are optimized to work on the 365 platform. In brief, these are Room 365 for room and resource booking requirements, Places 365, so think of this as a commercial trip advisor that allows your employees to rate and review places they've visited, a corporate URL shortener to help better socialize your brand, a SharePoint-based HR solution, and a case management solution as well. So this suite of products will continue to be worked upon, and the other functionality around that will be made available to you. If you'd like any further information on this, please contact us by email at inquiries@risual.com, or you can get in touch with your account manager. So where our business and technology consulting teams help to design, plan, build, test and deploy solutions, our managed services team will monitor, optimize and manage these accordingly. So this is a 24/7 service and is delivered in the UK by our dedicated Microsoft accredited engineers. Great, thanks Mike. Do you want to just move on one, please? Thank you. So at Risual, we have created 3 customer-ready strategies that are helping deliver business transformation by meeting business objectives, with IT being the enabler. So the first of these is Connected Business, which focuses on how you engage with your customers, ensuring you have the insight to access the right information when you need it, and this has been surfaced to any device wherever you are to enable you to make the right decisions. A great example of this is we have created an operational intelligence application for one of our clients, Scottish Fire and Rescue, that by better use of data and faster time to insight is helping them achieve their objectives of saving more lives. And we've got countless other examples of solutions that we've developed. Our end user compute strategy focuses on providing the right tools to your employees to fulfill their roles, and whether this be providing or making better use of smartphones, tablets and laptops to increase productivity, or by implementing Skype for Business to help provide better communication and collaboration and a flexible working solution in a secure way. Finally, we have our optimized service division, which focuses on enhancement of infrastructure, operations and processes. So if you think about data center transformation, and whether this is on-premise, hybrid or moving straight out to the cloud, we'll help you determine what's going to be the most suitable application delivery model for you. Again, we've got a great example of this where we're working with one of our customers, moving them from a traditional outsource agreement to a cloud-based solution fully supported by Risual, and in the process we'll be saving them millions of pounds. So that's all from me, and I hope that's given you a quick snapshot and an insight into our business, and I'll now hand across to Mike.
Right. Thank you very much, Sanj. Okay, so by way of an agenda, we're just going to cover off briefly why you might need an EDRMS within your organization. I then want to talk about a topic called information architecture, and this really is the foundations for any electronic document and records management solution. I'll then show you a high-level solution overview of the way we would normally deploy this solution. We can then drop into a demo to look at some of those pieces, and then we'll summarize and end with the Q&A at the end. So, do I actually need an EDRMS within my organization? And I would say, well, if you can relate to one or more of these statements or issues, then yes, you probably do. I mean, these are things we commonly hear from customers that are working on file shares, where we've got teams of people who have built up a large amount of data over time, but no one knows where anything is anymore. When new starters join, we try and sort of explain how our sort of extensive folder structure works, but it's just very cumbersome, very sort of difficult to work. We have also seen old versions of SharePoint where an information architecture hasn't been applied correctly, so we've basically got the same problems as a file share, but within a SharePoint site instead. So what is information architecture? Well, this really, it underpins the whole EDRMS solution. I mean, it provides the means to effectively manage all of the documents and electronic files throughout their defined life cycle. It helps us organize the content and present that content to users so that people have got the right information at the right time. It can also help prevent our solution from becoming a bit of an uncontrolled dumping ground. So we don't want to get to the, sort of into the situation that maybe our file shares are in. And we also need to start sort of to avoid all of the common issues that are commonly associated with file shares, with email-based solutions, where we've got a constantly increasing amount of storage. We've got excessive duplication of content. We've got difficulties finding the content because we've got so much duplication, and we've got no way to enforce policies. So when we talk about information architecture, we have to talk around a number of key areas. The questions that we've got sort of on the presentation are not an exhaustive list. These are some of the higher level things, but we really need to understand how much content we're going to have in this solution, and how frequently does this content change? How does it evolve over time? So to try and define what the life cycle for content is. And different items, different pieces of content will have a different content life cycle in terms of the amount of time they might sort of take to evolve or to sort of make their way through their life cycle within the system. But essentially every piece of content has a very similar life cycle in terms of the stages or phases that they go through. Some of the key topics within information architecture that we'll talk through a bit more is the idea of metadata and tagging this content, because it's all very well sort of having a solution where I can search for a file name, and maybe I can search the content of the file as well. So if it's a document, I can index the content of that. But metadata really sort of drives at the heart of an EDRMS solution, because this is data about that information contained within the document. So who owns this document? How is it categorized? How is it then reviewed? How often is it reviewed? So you can build all of those pieces into the foundation layer of the EDRMS solution. So from a content lifecycle perspective, we normally recommend an information architecture that identifies these four main phases. So to start with, we have every piece of content has a create date, so a point in time that this document or file has been created. And in order to do that, we need to try and provide a consistent way for our users to be able to create that content. This is consistent both in terms of the approach, maybe in terms of the templates that are being used, and also in terms of the type of content that can be created in certain areas. We might have certain sites within our solution where only a particular type of content can be created, but we need to be consistent in the approach, and we need to have this approach documented as part of our governance handbook. We need to start also looking at avoiding the duplication of content. This is a common hindrance to productivity, because people don't understand that we've got version controls built into SharePoint. So I go and create a document, and I create another one and rename it. And we're in no better position, really, than if we're in a file share. We also need to ensure that we've got the correct metadata applied to the content at the point of creation. Because if we don't do it at the point that the content's created, it becomes quite an onerous task to go back and tag all of the content and figure out who actually owned it and why it was created. And to do that after the fact is quite an intensive process, and it can be quite a mountain to climb. So the next phase, once we've got our content created, is what we refer to as the active use phase. So the content in this phase is in constant or frequent use. It's going to relate to a project or a subject area, or maybe a task or activity that's ongoing within the organization. This could also include content that's not been updated for a long time, but it can still be considered in the active use phase because it is up to date, because it's relevant. Content could also be draft documents in this phase. It doesn't just have to be the final document that we consider as active use. We also need to make sure that the content within the active use phase is presented to the right audience. We want to ensure that, for example, drafts are only visible to the people who can see the drafts. But when we publish this content to a wider audience, now we want to make sure that everybody who should be able to view the published content is actually able to view that content. The next phase of the life cycle we refer to as the semi-active use phase. So in this phase, the usefulness of the content has declined, or it's been superseded. And this could be because the project or the subject or the task that the content was originally created for is no longer live within the organization. However, the content might still be useful in certain scenarios. So we don't just want to delete this semi-active content. We need to still retain this. Maybe we need to retain it for evidence purposes or referential purposes. So we need some way of retaining the content, but I don't want to clutter up my active use areas with a whole lot of older content that forces a user to have to navigate or search through less relevant content in order to find the active, relevant content in order to get on with my job. We do also need the ability, though, to retrieve content, move content from the semi-active use phase, either back into an active use phase. Maybe it's become sort of relevant again. We're working on a project where I've referenced this content, and now I need to use it again. I need to make some amendments to it to include it as part of a project. Or maybe the content needs to be moved forward into the final outcome stage, which is our fourth phase of content. So this is where content's basically going to fall into two categories. We either want to mark this content for deletion because it is no longer relevant, it hasn't been accessed in a long time, it's so out of date, maybe we don't use the system or process that the content was originally created for. Or alternatively, we need to mark this content as record. We need to store it for a longer period of time in order to meet regulatory or compliance requirements. So in order to do that, we need to start looking at what records do we have within the organization and how are we going to actually apply the policies to these records in order to retain them for an extended period of time. So what I want to do now is kind of build up a solution overview to how an EDRMS solution might work. So across the bottom here in this box are going to be some of the fundamental services that really underpin the solution. These are where we're going to be creating some of the information architecture. I say some because it's more than just our content types and metadata information architecture, because that has to consider how information is going to be stored and in how many sites and where, things like that. But the content type hub and managed metadata service provide a way that I can create my organizational taxonomy. I can create a set of terms that describe our business, that describe the processes, or describe the structure of the business as a term set. Now, because this term set is centrally created, we can now enforce consistency by reusing this term set across the organization. So commonly, we might want to describe the organizational structure in terms of maybe the departments and teams that sit within it. Now, everywhere the department metadata item is used, we can tie this back to the term set, so we can drive that consistency. The content type hub works in a similar sort of way, but for content types. So if you're not familiar with the term content type, this is essentially a grouping of metadata columns. So if I were to create a report content type, it might have a name and a title for the report, an owner for the report report date when it was created. All those things are classed as metadata, and the content type wraps all of those fields together so that we can reuse that content type in our SharePoint environment. Content types can also include things like templates. So if the report needed to have a defined template attached to it, then every time we use this content type, we can have the same template. So the content type hub, the metadata, and the taxonomy stored within that managed metadata is essentially the glue that's going to bind everything together. And because our environment uses search, we don't really necessarily have to know where content is stored anymore, because we can search for it, or we can aggregate content. The other thing to note is that managed metadata can also provide a term set for our Delve profiles. So Delve profiles is the rebranded version of what was My Sites or SharePoint profiles. So this is the idea that I can bring together information about the people in my organization, but those core properties, such as departments and teams, can be driven by a managed metadata term set. So once we've identified our content types that we want to centrally push out, and we've got our profiles created, so we know who's in the organization, the next thing we typically do is start creating some sites for different purposes. So these could be team sites, these could be project sites, they could be sites or sort of referential sites for certain areas of the business, kind of communities of practice, if you will. But this essentially is where our create and active use phases of our document lifecycle or content lifecycle would host these phases for the content. Once we've got information stored within our team sites and our project sites, and we've got the metadata being populated as part of the creation of that content, we then will get to a point where we actually need to be able to search for that content. So the search center that's created within SharePoint can search across all sites, can search across the intranet, any content that's hosted within SharePoint. But we only really get benefit from that search when we're using a formal information architecture where we've got metadata that we can refine all of that content by. So I could search for documents and get documents from my team sites, from the project sites I'm involved in, from my intranet, but I only really want to see content from my own team site. So metadata can help us refine all of that to make it much more useful to us. Once I've created some of this content, I might actually want to share it with a wider audience. Sometimes the governance decision around team sites might be, well, we want these as kind of silos of information. I only want to work in isolation with my team. So when I've created some content that requires a wider audience, I need to have a mechanism by which I can publish it out to something like a document center, where this might store all of my approved and published content for the organization. So by that, I'm thinking sort of my policies and my procedures, maybe training material that's being created. I need a central place to be able to refer to all of that information. Now, over time, as we've gone through the create and active use phase of our content lifecycle, that content will gradually sort of reduce in relevance. So we need some way of being able to archive that content. We're moving it into the semi-active use phase. So by creating an archive area and using information management policies, which can be either built into the content type itself or built into the library, the document library within which the content is stored, we can automatically move content between the phases of its life cycle. So, as we said earlier, we don't want these team sites to become dumping grounds. So we might want to say, well, after 2 years of not being modified, let's move content from my team sites or my project sites into an archive. We need to sort of make sure that our team sites, project sites, are still relevant in the content that they hold. Now, an information management policy doesn't just have to stop there. We might actually say, well, once it's sat in the archive for a number of years and it still hasn't been retrieved back to the team site, or we no longer need that content anymore, then we need to move it into our final outcome stage. So an information management policy can have multiple stages to it. So the second stage for my retention policy might be, well, after 3 years of being in the archive, now delete it. So we've had a total of 5 years where the content hasn't been modified. But we might also want to put a process in place to prevent that content from being automatically deleted. The other outcome, obviously, is to retain this content for a longer period of time. So we have this concept of a record center within SharePoint, where I can send a copy of some content, or I can move some content to a record center and have it locked down and become immutable. So now I can refer to it for legal or audit or compliance sort of reasons, to be able to refer back to this content to see when it was actually sent or created as a record. Now, typically, when information moves to a record center, we would actually want it to retain some of the metadata, but then also add more metadata into this content. We might actually want to change the type of content that it has become. So in certain scenarios, we see people who identify processes as records. So any information to do with a particular process. So within the record center, we have content types defined, aligned to our process and the metadata required for the process. Whereas within the team site, there might have just been more standard documents with less metadata. So what I'll do now is show you a high-level, a fairly lightweight demonstration. So given the time that we've got and also the complexity of the topic area, it's going to be a fairly quick fly through some of the high-level concepts that we've just talked through. I'll also point out that all of the demos we host are purely in Office 365. So there are slight functional differences, or things may look slightly different if you have an on-premise version of SharePoint. Right. So first off, this is in Office 365 we have. In SharePoint as a wider sort of product, we have the idea of a content type hub. Now in SharePoint on-premises, you can define where your content type hub is going to be. in Office 365, it's pre-created for you in the background. You don't actually see it as part of the site collections within your SharePoint Administration Center. But effectively, you create the content types in exactly the same way. If I go off to site settings, I'll see that I still have all of the same sort of options that I'd expect to see as part of a regular team site, which is basically what this content type hub is. But here we've created some content types specific to our practices and the way that we want to work. And if I take a look at the practice document, we'll then see that we've got some custom columns assigned to this. And because we want to drive consistency, we're referring back to manage metadata columns in order to provide that consistency. So using the manage metadata term sets in the background to provide the options that we want people to select when they use these columns. The key difference between your standard content types and the content type hub content type is the fact that we've got this idea of publishing. So the content type hub can publish these content types, make them available for use within other areas of the SharePoint environment, and then we're basically subscribing to them or sort of adding them into our libraries or lists within the individual sites in the solution. We also have some information around the template that we might want to use. This is standard functionality, so this will work regardless of SharePoint on-premises or 365. And in this scenario, we're not defining a standard template at this point. And I'll explain why when we get into our team site. So if I just switch over to the admin center, so this is where things will look a little bit different for you, the on-premises folks. But within Office 365, we have the term store setting, and I can go and define all of my organizational term stores within this area. So if I expand practices and teams, here are all the practices and the teams that work within Visual. We have the ability to go and reuse terms. So where we've got these arrows here, this term has been reused elsewhere within my term store. So if I expand the purposes, I tell a lie. Expand the subject areas, we'll see that business productivity and architecture have been reused where we might want to provide terms, subject area terms that are specific to those practices. We can also provide some benefits around, this is where the idea of term sets really come into their own, because if you think about organizational restructures, and the way that normally causes a lot of chaos in terms of trying to reorganize information in a legacy environment. Well, with a term set, I can say, well, actually, I want to merge terms together. So if, for example, our business productivity practice and our cloud infrastructure practice were to merge, I could use that. I could use the functionality within the term set and give it a new title. We could use synonyms in the background to be able to still locate content that used to be classified as business productivity or used to be classified as cloud infrastructure content. And we can still use those terms in our search environment. The other piece that's important to an EDRMS solution is the idea of a send-to connection. So what this allows us to do is to move content or copy content. So in the case of my record center, what I actually want to do is, because it is still useful and still relevant, but now it's a record, I want to move this content to the record center, but leave a link in the original place. Whereas maybe with the team site, actually I want to move my content to the archive because I want to make sure that it's a decluttered environment. And okay, we've got the same thing with our document center, but we could also have, well, I just want to send a copy of this content. The other part is this allow manual submission. So we can use send to connections either as a manual option to be able to allow a user to send information between different sites, or we can use them in the information management policies, or if that is unticked, we can just use it as part of, maybe as part of a workflow. Now, the key difference in referring to send to connections and 365 is that send to the action to send to another area doesn't exist as part of the workflow actions in Office 365. It exists in SharePoint 2013, but you would need a third-party provider in order to facilitate the send to action within 365. So, if I go off to my team site, so this is where we would normally, as part of business productivity, we want to create our content. This is at the kind of the active use phase for anything to do with business productivity, and we're providing a consistent way of being able. We're providing a consistent way of being able to define that content. By creating a drop-down menu. Now, this is created just using a bit of JavaScript and using the content types that we've assigned to the environment. So if I wanted to create, for example, I want to create a review and recommendations document. So when I click Go, what's actually going to happen in the background is that Word is going to open, and in this instance, I'm actually opening the client version of Word. And as part of that, I've now got a report and a review and recommendations document that provides a template for consultants to go and fill in. If I then want to save this document, well, because I've created from my team site, it already knows certain information. It knows that it's going to be to do with SharePoint. It knows that it's in the business productivity practice. It knows it's to do with a health check. So I could then also say, well, I want to assign some more metadata to this. And within the business productivity team, okay, we're going to classify this as an infrastructure document. And then I'm going to save it. Now, this is Office 2016. So within Office, Office 365, the most recent versions of Office, the product Office, provide better integrations into SharePoint. So we can see on the left-hand side here, it knows about my OneDrive for Business site. It also knows about my OneDrive for Business, my OneDrive personal site, and it also knows about sites that I work with within my environment. It recognizes the fact that I've created this document from within my practice documents in the team site. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I want to save this document here. And so I'm literally going to save it, and then I could close. Well, that's finishing that bit off. If I go to my documents library, we'll see now that the document's automatically being added into the document library for me. It's automatically applied the metadata that we asked it to associate with it. And I could say, well, actually, I want to send this straight off to the archive. So I could send it to an archive, or I could publish it to our Internet Document Center. But we could also set up an information management policy in the background to automatically send it to an archive. So standard document library functions that we've got, so we can handle our version control, how many major minor versions should be stored within our create and active use areas. Should we allow check-in, check-out of documents? Do we want people to be able to collaborate on this content here? But then also some information management policies. Now, the information management policy could be applied to a specific type of content. So maybe for documents, we want those to move to the archive if they haven't been modified in a year. Whereas presentations, well, we refer to them a bit more, so we don't want to move those quite as frequently. Or we could apply it to a complete library to be able to say, well, I'm going to add a retention stage for every bit of content in this environment that says, after 2 years of being modified, I want you to automatically transfer this content. Okay, that's interesting. So quirks of Office 365, I'm afraid. So I could transfer this content to another location, or I could move it to a recycle bin if I wanted to, and I could apply this policy to everywhere within this environment. Sorry, every piece of content within this library. So if I navigate back to the document library, what we'll do is send that document off to the archive, and whilst it's being archived, I'll quickly show you the document center. So that document's now being moved off to the archive for us, and if we head over to the document center. So this is our internal document center where any published material that we refer to on the intranet is published into these areas. So we could look at collateral for our business productivity team. We want to see, well, what are the options we can offer customers in terms of the solutions. And on the left-hand side, we've still got our metadata. So I just want to look at offerings to do with our intranet evolution, so we can provide data sheets and engagement overviews for how it's all going to work. And we could also, within this area, we're using some of the social features to be able to highlight popularity of documents. So driving content through to the front page by using those usage stats. Okay, in the background, that document's been sent off to the archive. Now, what this is saying here is, well, even though you sent it to the archive, what I'm actually going to do is reorganize where that content's going. So if I click on this, I can still get to my content, but rather than it being stored in a top level or in a single environment within the archive, what we can actually say is, well, I want to create a structure where we've got different document libraries, maybe, aligned to different teams or different departments. So when I move over, I can see, well, I'm now in my business productivity archive where my content has moved to. Now, I could have different storage areas for different team sites, so that we can see content that's been recently archived, or we can see content that just maybe the finance team have created. All very much depends on your security model as to who should see what. Because you remember, within SharePoint, you can only see what you actually have permissions to be able to see. So if I return to my document library, and I will show you the other way of creating content. So here we've got content driven by me, with our kind of our creation point being our SharePoint team site. Excuse me. However, I could also create a blank document. And one of the good things about a SharePoint-based EDRM solution is that we can really drive benefit of having almost a seamless, having this solution sitting seamlessly in the background, because I can still create my content. I could enforce my properties so that we have to provide subjects, we have to provide items and metadata. At the moment, it doesn't know what it's going to be, but it will do once we actually save it. We could also invite other people to share this content quite quickly once we've saved this. So I'm going to go ahead and save it, and in the same way as we did before, it recognizes the fact that I've got certain areas in SharePoint that I use regularly. So I'm going to save it to my business productivity site. I'm going to give it a name. Now what this is actually going to do is find out what content types are available. Now, because there is always a default content type within a document library, it will automatically be assigned to that. And now we can see on the right-hand side that I'm able to share this document with someone else. So I want to securely invite Sanjay to come and edit this document. And I don't have to leave the environment to do it. I don't need to email an attachment to anybody. I'm still within Word, and I can quite easily click share, and that will now give Sanjay the edit rights to this document. Now, also because we can now save this document, we will be able to see this dropping straight into the document library. And in this case, we're going to define it as a practice document, and therefore it knows that it's got certain key pieces of metadata, and everywhere we've got these little tags here. Well, these refer to a piece of managed metadata that sits in the background. Yeah? So once I've completed my metadata for this document, sorry, Sanjay, could you come out of that, please? I might want to then also declare this record, this item as a record. So I want to be able to send this to the record center, and I'm going to leave a link behind so I can still get access to it from my team site. Now, what we've got, what we can see here is something slightly different to the team archive scenario. In the team archive scenario, rules were put in place to recognize that it was business productivity content, so automatically move it to a business productivity library. What we're seeing here is the fact that it doesn't understand what business productivity content is or what a practice document is. So when I go and click on this, it's going to actually say, well, I know what content type you were a practice document, but from a records perspective, we're only concerned with content being classified as a guideline, a procedure, contract policy, or a piece of training material. So for guidelines, I need maybe a completely different set of metadata. As I said at the moment, from the beginning, this is a bit of a lightweight demo. So what we're seeing here is pretty much the same metadata as a practice document, but you could have completely different metadata requirements if you decide. And once I've told the record center about this content, this will now say, okay, I've changed where the content is, and I'm now going to file it under the guidelines area. I navigate off to Record Center. I can drop into the guidelines area. I can see that my content being submitted as a record to this area. In the background, because SharePoint is this flexible platform, you can sort of decide how and when you want records to be declared. So in this instance, anytime content hits this records library, it's going to be automatically declared as a record. So that if I now try and delete this content, then it's going to tell me, well, hang on, this is a record. You can't do that in this scenario. So we want to retain this. And maybe we've got a different set of information management policies that sits behind the records center in order to control this content. Now, the final bit that we need to look at from the perspective is the fact that we need to be able to find all this information again. We need to be able to search for content. So with a centralized search environment where we've got metadata applied from around the environment, I can now look at, well, I want content from specific kinds of sites, specific content types, maybe results, and across the top here, maybe I want to change the type of results that's coming back. We're looking at everything at the moment, but maybe I just want to see people that have the word SharePoint as part of their profile. So now I've got a different set of metadata that's related to people instead. If I want to sort of refine my content, to be able to say, well, I'm only actually interested in, say, Excel spreadsheets. Well, and Excel spreadsheets that are practice documents that were created by, I'm going to say, John. I can take thousands of results and reduce them down to, well, 60 results in this instance. And I could sort of use Office Online to be able to look at a preview of this content to figure out if it is the right document that I actually want to edit. So, in summary, SharePoint can provide a very flexible platform for an EDRMS solution. It can be cut to fit your organizational requirements. And like I said before, it's a huge area, in fact. And the demo that I've shown you is a very, very simplistic, high-level overview of some of the key features of it. Through SharePoint, we can actually deliver sort of an EDRMS solution as quite a short timescale, sort of relative to the your typical large content management applications. I mean, we're talking months in timescales and thousands of pounds rather than years and millions of pounds. because we can sort of use predefined content, predefined policies to help create our information management policies and to define the content types that we want to use. We've also got this integration between Windows 10 and Office, so that you can have your document repositories running in the background, and you can have workflows moving content around, and through the document information panel, through sharing, through a streamlined information architecture, we can apply default column values to all of this content, so that it knows where I'm creating content, even if I'm creating it just from within an Office product. So in terms of next steps, the way that Visual can help you is we have a prepackaged concept offering where we can create some sites, document centers, archives, record centers, so that you can prove the concept, so you can see the capabilities of SharePoint within the environment. We then have a product referred to as the EDRMS Accelerator. So this is a fixed price package where we have put together a number of sites using a recommended current best practice that we can then customize to fit organization requirements. And at the top end of the scale, there's the full scale enterprise deployment, where it's a fully customized EDRM solution for your business. So, we are hitting the time quite closely. So,
thanks, Mike. There's a couple of questions in the IM window which have come through from Yap, and please, if any of the rest of you have got any questions, please put them in, post them in the IM window, or we'll be happy to follow up with you at a later date. And again, appreciate this has been a really high-level overview and a really insightful demonstration into the capabilities of SharePoint as an EDRMS solution. But yeah, fire away.
Okay, so Yap is asking, if you're not coming from a greenfield situation, so we haven't got metadata or a corporate taxonomy, how do we cope with it? So this is really trying to identify the type of content that you work with on a day-to-day basis. Because content types can be created in a hierarchical way where we are inheriting metadata, you could start with quite a high-level set of content types, maybe something as simple as defining documents from spreadsheets, from presentations, and then applying pieces of metadata to actually describe the type of information that document is. So is it a report, a policy, a procedure, a guideline? And that would start to create some of the items required in your metadata. Now, where you start to then break contents out to be more specific, so for the example of maybe a policy, well, for every policy we create, we want a specific template. So that requirement dictates the need to have a separate content type for it. So we could then inherit from document to create a policy content type. But it's essentially knowing your data, doing a bit of research to figure out what you work with regularly, and how it works, how you review, things like that. Okay. Yes, the transitions can also be logged. So when documents are passing between locations, you can retain properties about the document as part of the records. As part of the content organizer feature. So the feature that's used as part of the archive and the record center effectively works like a great big funnel. And we're defining rules as part of that. So when pieces of information, pieces of content drop into the top, it goes through a rules-based scenario to work out how it should be stored and where it should be stored. One of the settings for that is to be able to retain some properties. The when we're looking at 365 in particular, the auditing capabilities that sit in the background are they exist, but you have to remember that although we can track movements of documents and things like that, it's going to be very much down to your individual compliance requirements as to how much auditing we should be doing, because all of those audit logs are stored as part of your SharePoint environment. So if you're tracking a lot of actions against a lot of data, that is going to impact upon your storage pool. There are third-party solutions available that will do the same job, but externalize those audit logs for you.
Just a couple of people typing in the window there.
Yep. Yep. DocAlf is one of those premium third-party products. Very capable product.
So again, that's another application that we have experience of and that we partner with as well.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, we as part of trying to figure out what the best solution for you, and we want to point out that we can obviously arrange a pre-sales call to talk through the options with you, or come on site to discuss these in person and go through a more in-depth demo that fits your requirements.
Absolutely. So I think we're right close to time now. I think we've answered those questions that have initially been thrown up. So appreciate a lot of information has been thrown your way. So in terms of next steps, this webcast will be made available to you on YouTube. But if you've got any other questions or queries, don't hesitate to email in at inquiries@visual.com. But otherwise, one of the account team will be in touch with you. So I hope you found that useful, and we'll look to catch up with you in due course.
Thank you very much.
Great. Yeah, thanks for your comments, everybody.